Well, welcome everybody. Very good to have you here today. It's always, after we've had a break, it's always exciting to see people actually show back up again. So good to have you here. I want to introduce you to my doppelganger. This is Mark, the cardboard version of me. And my birthday was yesterday, and my wife asked some friends, what should I get for Mark? Something he won't expect. And they said, get him a cardboard cutout of himself. So this is the me version, and evidently I'm a little bit taller than we thought I was because they tried to make this the same height. Anyway, I'm looking for suggestions on various uses of what to do with a 5'9" version of myself. So welcome. Today we're going to be talking about what is Agile. And since we've had a little break from Agile LnL during the summer, I figured this is a good time to come back and just kind of relook at Agile principles and just talk about what does it mean to actually be pursuing agility. Thank you. And just for fun, hopefully this will be fun, put it in the chat, guess how old I am. I was at a diner over the weekend, sitting there next to my wife, and the couple next to us leaned over and said, oh, so do you go to school here in town? And I consider that to be a compliment, so I'm well over that. I want to see if anybody, just take a guess. I'm just curious. No one's willing to try. 38. Well, that's okay. 46. Okay. Marine is the closest so far. 45. Okay. Any other guesses? So I actually just turned 50 yesterday. So the beard makes you look older. Okay, the beard may look older. Somebody told me I look more sage and wise. So if I'm trying it out to see if people think I look more intelligent with a beard, but we'll see. I'm not sure my wife is a fan of the feel of the beard, so it may not last long. Okay, so what is Agile? That's what we're going to be looking at today. So first question for you, just kind of as a warm-up here, which type of team would you rather be part of? Would you rather be one where everyone is trying to follow the Agile principles, or one that ignores the principles but you get paid 10% more, or one that ignores the principles but pays 20% more? So which type of team would you rather be part of? So we got 17% of us are like, the extra pay is worth it, and that is a very legitimate way to look at it. It may be a lot more painful, but maybe you're like, for 20%, I'm willing to put to handle a little bit more pain. So there should be a link to the Slido, or you can open the QR code there. Keep that up on your phone or something, because we will have the question as we go. Now, I like how we've got 6%. Or I guess that's like one person out of the 18 is like, you know what, it's not worth the 20% more, but for 10% more, I'm willing to do it. I don't want 20% more, I only want 10% more. So anyway, just an interesting question. And what I want us to think about is just what is the value of following Agile, not just from a standpoint of what it provides to the business, but just to the way of working. Okay, if you're not familiar with it, I have a book, Starting Agile, Finding Your Path. If you do not have a copy of this, email me. I'll send you a PDF if you're interested in that. You can also get it from Amazon, and we tend to give them away as prizes from time to time as well. Also, if you have not gone to youtube.com/markshed, we have a bunch of Agile cartoons there, various things. Some of them, we've heard people get good results of using them just as part of their daily stand-up, just watching it once a week or something and getting people talking about it. Just keep people kind of thinking in terms of what do the principles actually mean, and are we making daily decisions based on principles that we're trying to follow. Okay, coming up next week, this is going to be very interesting. Susan and Matthew are teaching assistants at University of British Columbia, and University of British Columbia has a very interesting, very successful Introduction to Computer Science program that teaching people how to approach problem solving in code. Some of the stuff that's come out, or some of the similar approaches I've done with my son, he's still in high school, it's been a very good foundation just in thinking about how to approach problem solving in code. Anyway, they're going to be coming and talking about what that approach is like as they take freshmen and move them through this process of learning how to code. They're also going to be talking about artificial intelligence, how that plays out in the university setting, which I think will have some interesting takeaways for just what that looks like for the future of all of our jobs. Anyway, that's next week. It's going to be a little bit different, but I think it's going to be interesting. If you have a child who's looking at maybe pursuing, you're looking at careers, maybe looking at computer science or something else, but not sure, this may be very, very interesting for them. Or if you're just in a capacity where you have conversations with people in that, or just wondering what is coming through the university now and how's that going to shape the way the job market looks in the future, should be very, very interesting. So I'm really looking forward to this talk with Susan and Matthew. After that, the next week on the 14th, we're going to be talking about projects versus products, and just what does that mean? And does shifting between these two ways of thinking give us a different view, and does it give us different outcomes, different results? So that's what we're talking about on the 14th. And then after that, Veronica Roth is going to be talking about culture change and big group planning, practicing being agile while doing agile. I'm looking forward to that one. Then I'm going to be talking about what is behavioral driven development. We're going to be looking at some examples of that. I think this is particularly interesting in the situation we're in now, where AI is probably a lot of hype, but a lot of good things too, related to how we do software development. When it comes to, particularly when it comes to trying to pursue technical excellence, this is one way that you can continue to do that, even if you're using AI or you've got people just coding without AI. So I think this is going to be interesting from that standpoint. We're not going to get into a lot of AI, but if you view it from that lens, I think it's going to be very helpful. And then we've got on the 4th of November, Adam Zeman is going to be talking to us about progressive delivery. He's got a new book out, and I think that's going to be pretty interesting. And there's other events. If you want to see the other events, it's events.agilelnl.com. Also want to mention, if you just go to agilelnl.com, I think I've updated the page since there, but you can send people here and they can sign up to be on the invite list. Also, I think I added some new buttons to this that lets you go in and view the archives. So that may be of interest as well. Also, if you go in, if you sign up to be on the list, it sends you a copy of the PDF of my book. So that's another way to get it if you're interested. Okay, next question. What word comes to mind when you hear the word, or what word comes to mind when you hear the word agile? So just in free association, you hear the word agile, what word comes to mind? Flexibility, fast. It's good. Agility, adaptable. Self-organizing, adaptive. Team. Usually about this point, I get the word cult. People start throwing in the word cult, which is opposite of clumsy. In my mind, for some reason, I picture a trapeze artist. I've never been on a team that's doing that level of physical agility, I guess. But that's what comes to mind for me. Empowered, okay. Most of us have positive associations with it, and that may be a little bit of selection bias based on the people that are spending their lunch hour with us here. Oftentimes, I get things related to a cult or something like that. So there's been negative associations with this stuff. I'm glad to know most of us are having positive associations with us. I think we are in a situation where I think Agile has maybe been co-opted by a lot of people that are selling things. And in ways that there is a lot of times negative things associated with the idea of agility. Matter of fact, a lot of my colleagues that do different types of coaching and have previously branded as a coaching Agile have started moving away from the term, just because it sometimes in some organizations carries a lot of baggage that would mean things that they're not trying to convey. So that's something to think about when you're talking about stuff, because there's, as we look through the principles and the principles coming up here, it's worth recognizing that when you say the word agile in different places, it might mean something different to them. So you've got to be careful to make sure that when you say agile, they're not thinking, oh, they're coming in and trying to create huge meetings and they're trying to create the scaled agile framework, and that's what they think of with agile, when really what you're trying to do maybe is just get the team working together and thinking more about how does this help the customer and getting things into the customer hands sooner. Little a agile versus big A agile. Yes, definitely. Okay, so let's look. The Agile Manifesto is what defines what Agile is as far as the official definition of Agile. And the reason I point to this is a lot of times I think what happens that is getting called Agile has very, very little to do with the Agile Manifesto and a lot more to do with what somebody's trying to sell to an organization. So Agile comes down to a set of values and principles. The set of values are that we're going to value individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So if you're in a situation where in an organization that's really saying we're Agile, but they're valuing processes and tools way more than individual interactions, well, they're not actually following the values there. And so you ought to be thinking, are we actually following Agile or are we following something else? We value working software over comprehensive documentation. We value customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and we value responding to change over following a plan. Now, in all of these pairs of things, the bold ones are the things that we value more, which does not mean that we are going to make sure we have no processes and tools or no documentation or we have absolutely no plan. It's just if we have to choose between these two things, we're going to place more value on the one that's in bold than the one that's in regular type. So just think about for a moment, and we won't take this back to anyone, but what value does your organization most struggle with? So of these things that we've said we value in your particular organization or your particular team, whatever, however you want to slice it up, or you yourself, however you want to think about it, which of these things is most the struggle to value more than what we're trying not to value? Okay, so we got 50% are saying responding to change, that's the thing that's difficult to do. And that is a very, that can be a very, very difficult thing. Some organizations do it better than others. Some organizations are in particular areas that it is a lot harder to respond to change. If you have to have your plans approved and then you try to change it, that's a lot more painful. Okay, it looks like after that, we've got individuals and interactions are the other things. So probably more that we're focused on processes and tools, customer collaboration, and the working software. It sounds like most of us are having the easiest time valuing working software, which is interesting take here. What does your organization tend to value most over its Agile counterpart? So of these positive and negatives, which ones are the ones that they're maybe valuing, that Agile says, we're not going to value this as much, that the organization is really valuing? So like, we're really, really focused on comprehensive documentation, or we're really, really focused on processes and tools more than interactions. Okay, so hopefully that's kind of interesting just seeing. If you look at this, you'll probably discover that your organization is struggling with things that lots of organizations are struggling with, right? It's not like everybody's in one particular camp here. Sounds like a lot of this particular group here, we're probably a lot in organizations that are very big on our processes and big on our tools, maybe sometimes to the detriment of actually even delivering what the customer is looking for. I was looking at it was a thing about some different startup businesses, and they were talking about how long they went before they bought even an ERP or CRM business. And these places were doing $10 million of sales a year, and they were just tracking everything in a few spreadsheets because the processes and tools weren't really as important to them. It was more of their working with the people and their customers, and they didn't have time to stop and think about putting in a CRM system because they weren't at a point that they actually needed it yet. They were valuing that, getting out and talking to people more than the tool that was going to be driving that, which isn't anything against CRM systems. It was just interesting to see how much this particular organization had grown without doing what seems like a very basic thing. Okay, so let's talk about some of the principles. So first principle, our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. One of my experiences working with an organization that I thought really, really exemplified this is it was an organization in Canada, and they had to do everything in French as well as English, and they had a lot of clients that were in Germany and other places. So they needed their app to be multilingual. But when we started really talking to them about what they needed, and it was going to be a for like market research, and you know how you'll sometimes have an opportunity, we'll pay you $50, you come here, we'll show you all these different Coke cans, and you tell us how they make you feel as a person or whatever. That type of market research stuff. And they wanted a platform to be able to do this online, and my company was building it for them. So we started talking to them, and they're like, multilingual is very, very important. And we're like, okay, we absolutely understand that, and we will make this multilingual, but is there any way we could satisfy you with something earlier? Could we give you some piece of software earlier that's not multilingual that would be valuable to you? And in this particular case, they said, well, yes, we've got a customer right now. If we could do this in, I think it was English. If we do it in English, we have a customer right now that we can make X amount of money from. And I said, okay, so we don't want to forget the fact that it's going to be multilingual, but our highest priority is to give you something early and then continue to deliver stuff. So if it's more valuable to deliver something right now that's in English, and then you can use it and we can get feedback and you can start making money with it, let's do that. So we did. We delivered the English version and then quickly went back with the next version we may have done was German, and built it in a way that they could add any other languages they want as well. But that decision at the very beginning of trying to satisfy what they needed early and then continuously deliver allowed them to make money with this in a way that they wouldn't have if we had have waited in order to build out all the multilingual capabilities. And I think that's a good example, or that's one of the examples that comes to my mind when I think of situations I've been in where we've done software for people and we're able to satisfy them by giving them something earlier and then continuing to iterate on that. Welcome changing requirements, even late in development. Agile processes harness change for the customer's competitive advantage. This is one that we said earlier was hard, right? It was dealing with the change. And one thing I want to point out here is I think a lot of times we focus on the first part of this, welcome changing requirements even late in development, and then we skip the rest, right? It's not just that we like change and being thrashed back and forth. It's right here that we're doing it for the customer's competitive advantage. If we're just changing for change's sake, we're not actually looking at the principle here. This isn't saying that we welcome changing requirements because we weren't able to communicate well at the beginning. This is saying something has changed and we need to respond to that because it lets our customers be more competitive. One example of I think of this is things companies have done to recognize that they don't know what change is going to be like. And one that comes to mind is they're called Basecamp. Back when the story I'm about to tell you happened, they were called 37 Signal. And they make a pretty popular project management tool. And they had launched, I took a group of people that were working for me to their offices in Chicago. May have been a year, maybe less than a year after they had launched Basecamp and it was starting to really take off. And they were just walking through their process of how they had built this piece of software. And they told me, they told us, and actually I think it was about a year after they had launched. And they said, when we built this, we couldn't take, no, it was less than a year. I'm getting my stories confused. We couldn't take credit cards. He said, we did not have a payment mechanism built into this when we started this. And their reasoning is they didn't know if anyone would actually buy this or use it. And they had a 90-day free trial. So their thought was, we don't know how these requirements might change. We may discover that the only people using it are corporate and they're going to pay with a PO. And so having a credit card processing isn't valuable at all. So we're not going to build that part in. And we've got 90 days to discover that and then build the credit card processing. So what they were doing is they were kind of hedging their bets of saying, we think some things are going to need to change. We can launch this earlier. We've got 90 days before we could charge anyone anything anyway. We can launch this earlier. We can adapt to anything people need, and we can change the requirements of where we think we're going based on actual feedback. So they were doing that with the idea of adapting what they needed for their, in this case, they were their customers, for their competitive advantage to make sure they were building what was needed in the marketplace. And that went, oftentimes, if you're doing a business that's trying to make money, the credit card processing is one of the first things you try to get in. But they took an opposite approach and it worked out very well for them. Next Agile principle, deliver working software frequently, from a couple of weeks to a couple of months with a preference to the shorter time scale. So when this was written, the idea of delivering something in a couple of weeks was really, really fast. Nowadays, you'll find a lot of organizations are able to deliver much, much more rapidly than this. So I wouldn't get stuck on a couple of weeks. But there are a lot of organizations that still are struggling with trying to get to a couple of weeks. The point I would take away from this is being able to deliver something on a short time frame has value to your customers. We'll probably get into it in 2026, but we'll look at that. I'm going to do a talk on the cost of delay and basically saying when we look at stuff, if we wait to give the customer this, how much is that actually costing us versus if we could give it to them sooner? And if that's actually valuable, can we arrange our work in a way that we can give them something valuable sooner so they can start earning a return on investment from it? I was talking to an organization that my company was doing software engineering work for one of their subsidiaries, and I'll show you a graph from that in a minute of what we had done there. But they were well, here, I'll show you the graph here. So this is when we started working, we took on a software project that they had been having somebody else do, one of the subsidiaries had been having somebody else do. And when we came in, it was taking about 60 days to deliver any functional change to the software and get it all the way through and approved and working in production and everything. And so these are the story numbers. So I think we came in and I can't remember if the first stories, but there's story number 7, story number 8, story number 10. So as we're going through, some of them ended up getting canceled, so they're not all on there. But as we're going through, when we get over here and we were delivering story number 63, we delivered in half a day. And that was the testing, deployed to prod, deployed to dev, going through the entire process. Whereas before, it was taking us nearly 60 days to get something through. And that's when we had started with company. But we were really focused on this idea of delivering things on a shorter time frame. Well, the subsidiary that we were doing this for, their parent organization was like, hey, we'd like to come talk to you because you're doing something that's not happening in our company. And so they brought me in. I'm going around looking at what they're doing. They're showing me their software they're building, and it was a big ERP system that they were building on their own. Looked great. It had some really cool things. I was like, wow, this is really, really nice what you're building here. How long have you been working on it? They said, we've been working on this for 5 years. I said, well, oh, that's great. How much of this is in production? I mean, how much of what you showed me is being used on a day-to-day basis? And they said, oh, none of it. So they had been working for 5 years, probably spent millions of dollars on building this thing, and none of it was actually in the user's hands. And that's what this principle is saying. That's not a good way to manage risk. And that company went on, and last time I talked to them, they had gotten some stuff into production, and they were basically pulling the plug on it. So years, more than half a decade of development effort gone into this, multiple developers working on it. And one of the big things that made it to where they were pulling the plugs is they basically didn't trust the process anymore if they needed something changed. This principle would have helped steer away from that. Even if it just got them to the point that they were able to experience it sooner and they pulled the plug at 1 year instead of 5 years, that would have still been a valuable thing for them. But this is what you want to see is actually, and what I find is a lot of times teams aren't actually looking at this. Teams aren't actually looking at how long it takes to deliver things. I was having some conversations here just the other day with a team. I was saying, in the stand-up, I don't think we're actually looking at how long something has been in flight. Is it possible that if we just make that more visible and say that this is something important to us, recognize that it's one of the principles, could we actually, just by making it visible, start getting the teams thinking in terms of, oh, I could start this new thing, or I could help Bob deliver the thing that he's working on. And that would drive our cycle time down, and that would be more valuable. So this principle is really, it's very, very key to getting agility, but it's really easy to miss sometimes because I think it's very easy to focus on trying to get the magnitude of what we're delivering rather than the cycle time of what we're delivering. And if you notice all these principles, none of this says we're going to deliver bigger things less frequently, right? What we want to do is deliver smaller things more frequently because then we get faster feedback and we're able to better meet the needs of the customer and better able not to develop a bunch of stuff that turns out we don't need. Business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. I was doing a conference at the Federal Reserve Bank. I think we were in San Francisco. And I was working with a friend of mine there, and we had all these robots, and we took the people that were playing, we divided people up into teams, and we're going to be using behavioral driven development to program these robots. And we took, one person said, okay, you're the user, you're the person, and took them out and told them what they needed to know. And then they were there working with the team to help the robot go through the maze and stuff that we were working on. Anyway, when we got through, asked everybody what they thought, how did they think it went. And the feedback I thought was most interesting is quite a few people said they were very envious of any team that had access to the business owner like we had done in the simulation. So they had somebody there that knew everything, that was playing the role of the person that knew everything they needed the robot to do. And it was the user of the application from that standpoint. And people were saying, this is really rare. We don't usually get to talk to business people like this in their particular setting. And somebody else spoke up and said that their experience was the best predictor of success or failure on projects was how much access they had to a business owner. And if they had access to a business owner, somebody that you could go and say, hey, is this what you want? And get feedback rapidly, that increased their chances of success. On the other hand, if it was something where it took a few days to get feedback from the business owner, that correlated very strongly with the chances of projects failing or not meeting their full potential and sometimes failing as well. And that was it was interesting having that conversation with them. And one thing I realized is if you've got the business owner where you're able to communicate with them very rapidly like that, it's a lot easier to have a conversation and say, hey, we're trying to do this. Is this a good idea? And them saying, oh, no, actually, that's not what I meant. You're right. That's exactly what I said I wanted. But when you said it back to me, that's not what I want. Or when you read the way you interpreted the document I gave you back to me, that's absolutely not what I want. Here's what we need to do. Or having conversations where the developers are saying, hey, you said you wanted this, and I think we can get 90% of that by doing this other thing that's really, really easy, or it's functionality we already have that I think accomplishes your business goal. And then the business owner can either say, no, we actually do need to do it. That extra 10% is what really matters and what's really valuable here. Or they might say, oh, you're right. Yeah, yes, that functionality is there. We don't have to build this. I didn't realize that we could do this already. And I had just written what I asked for based on how I thought it had to be done. The 10% that you're saying you can't do isn't really important to me anyway. I just had it in there because I didn't think there was another way to do it. Those types of conversations are what drive agility, right? Because that's what lets you say, we're going to do this in a simpler, faster way, or recognize when you can't do it in a simpler, faster way. That's agility right there. So this principle of having the business people and developers working together daily throughout the project, so there's that rapid feedback and communication, is very key on being able to deliver things and adapt as you go, instead of building lots of stuff because you think they want this and you're not going to hear back from them for 2 weeks or a week or whatever. So you're going to do your best to guess what they want. This takes a lot of the guesswork out of it. Build projects around motivated individuals. Give them the environment and support they need and trust them to get the job done. I was on a project with the Treasury, and one of the lead people in the project management, I remember talking to him on the phone. He's like, Mark, if you need something, you tell me and we'll get it. We want to make the team successful. If you need it, we're going to give you what you need to get the job done. And he said, if you need a rocket in your front yard with your picture on it, I'll get you a rocket in your front yard with your picture on it if that helps the team be successful. I unfortunately could not find any way to justify getting a rocket in my front yard with my picture on it, but he did come through on other things where we need connectivity and things like that, and that project was very successful because they were building it around motivated individuals and actually give them the support they needed. What does your organization build projects around? So consider this for a moment, and how would you describe what your organization builds the projects around? Do they build it around motivated individuals? Do they build it around apathetic individuals? Do they build it around a scaling framework or architectural layers or a 5-year plan? So this is interesting. Go ahead and please do try to participate in this because it's fascinating to see how these vary from time to time when I give this talk. And if you don't have it up on your phone, that slido.com and type in that number will let you get stuff up here. And I do want to point out that other than apathetic individuals, none of these things are bad, right? Having architectural layers is not a bad thing. Having a 5-year plan is not a bad thing. Having a scaling framework, depending on how it's used, may not be a bad thing. But if your organization builds the project around some of these things, we have to think about what does that do to our ability to deliver with agility. And my experience has been when you are building your project around architectural layers, and that's what's actually driving your project, it has a very high chance of either getting canceled, costing too much, under-delivering, lots of things that you don't want with agility if that's what it's actually being built around. Once again, that isn't to say that it's a bad thing to have architectural layers. It's just that you're not going to be able to respond to agility if the main thing driving the way you build projects is the way they happen to be constructed, or the way that you're thinking they're going to be constructed. Some of the most, some of the biggest agility pivots I've seen is when one architecture was being used and they discovered there was a way to do it much more efficiently with a change to the architecture. And some of the biggest failures I've seen is when one architecture was being used, and even though the team knew it wasn't working, they didn't feel they could change it and kept on heading down that path. I think I've got an example here in just a second. So, the most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation. So I think it's interesting that they actually said face-to-face, not necessarily in person, which with the rise in remote work and maybe a little bit of decline now, the idea of face-to-face, we can still do over video. Now, I would still say in person is a much better way to communicate if you can, but with the right equipment, I've seen face-to-face communication over video conference actually work really, really well. Far better than just a bunch of people on telephones trying to talk to each other. Matter of fact, I was working with one team, and this was kind of right as COVID happened, so a lot of us had never seen each other, and I wanted to really emphasize getting people to work with their video on so we can see each other. And if I say something and you think it's a dumb idea, I can see that expression go across your face and realize maybe I'm not headed in a good direction or I'm not explaining it well. Just make sure those types of interactions could happen. So I want to get everybody these shirts that you see here. Matter of fact, we're going to give one of these sweatshirts away. I think I've got everything except for a medium. We're going to give one of these away here at the end, so stay tuned for that. I want to give everybody one of these shirts. Unfortunately, the organization I was working with had a limit on the gifts I could give people. If you went over, I think it was $25, it started getting scrutiny as being an ethics violation. So I couldn't get the sweatshirts I wanted for the price I needed. So I discovered, though, that I could buy a screen printing press. So I bought a screen printing press, and using my very inexpensive child labor, we were able to do these well under the ethics limit thing. So we printed up these shirts and sent them to everybody, and a lot of them probably still have them, and I print them up from time to time to use as a giveaway. But the focus of that was to get the team actually working to where they were collaborating, they could see each other and work together. And I was talking to somebody that was on that team after people went different ways, and he's like, yeah, that was a special time of working, and I don't like what I'm doing now, but that was really, really good. I've had other people that have worked this way that I've worked with that moved on to other projects and said, I'll probably spend the rest of my career looking for a team that works together like that again. And a big portion of it was the fact that they really valued, both of these teams really valued this thing of face-to-face communication. And so they were able to work remotely, but in a way that was highly effective, just because they could see each other. I was working with another team that would we were all in New York, all working out of the same co-located office. But during the daily stand-up, a lot of people would call in, and then they'd show up later. I thought, well, maybe they were traveling, so they called in, make sure they didn't miss it. But then one day I came to the daily stand-up, and I got there like right before it started, and I realized as I walked through the building that a lot of these people were coming to the building and either hanging out in the hall or sitting at a cubicle somewhere, calling in on their phone, and then doing the daily face-to-face meeting, and then walking into the room. And it was just so funny because they were all co-located, but they were doing the exact opposite of what this says about face-to-face communication being valuable. Even in the daily face-to-face meeting, they weren't engaged, and lots of issues with that, how to make those meetings valuable to people. If they had felt it was more valuable, maybe they would have been more likely to show up. But it was just so interesting to see these principles, but in the complete negative of the way it was being practiced. Working software is the primary measure of progress. So I have well, first let me ask everybody this. So how do you feel about working software being the primary measure of progress? So just on a happy to sad face, when you hear the idea of like, if your team's like, okay, we're going to try to avoid measuring anything as progress other than our primary measure, which is working software. How would that make you feel? And some of the things I've heard when I've suggested that teams focus more on working software being the primary measure of progress is, well, then we won't get credit for doing the requirements. Or they won't know that we're working if we don't show as we're doing things, even if it's stuff that we haven't, that we won't get credit for the stuff that's not actually delivering software. And some of us maybe feel, this 8% over here may have been in places where if you wait to deliver software, people think you're not doing anything and you don't get credit for it, or the portion that you're working on doesn't get the credit for things. I was working with a team where they were demoing all kinds of even demoing things that we went into the database and changed this field, and they would, during the demo, they would show how they had gone in and changed the field, even though for the user it didn't mean anything to them other than that some other part of the application would work. And I had suggested that this team switch and start only demo things that you could have the user drive. One of the users could drive. If it's not something the user could drive or could see how this is something that they would do, just don't demo it. It's not that it's not important, but we want to focus on the working software that we've actually delivered that the users can see as being progress. And that was, I was basically told that is just a step way, way too far, because there were a lot of people that were getting a lot of what made them feel like they were making progress was things other than delivering working software. And the management was concerned that if we started working toward doing that, these people would just be completely demotivated. And what I want to point out about this is the idea that the idea of working software being the primary measure of progress. I think a lot of times what we do is say, oh, we can't do that in our particular situation because we're working in this particular way. What this principle should be telling us is if you're working in a way that makes this where you might not want to do it, you might want to change the way that you're working. So things that would come up if we are going to do this, then we probably need to make sure this might have an impact on how we write our stories. Maybe we don't have a story that says build out a database layer that we can't show to anybody as working software because we want to be able to show our incremental process. So this particular principle will push us toward doing more vertical slices through, like a slice of the cake instead of a layer of the cake. But if we see this and it's hard, it should challenge us to work a different way, not just say, okay, we're going to this is too painful. I won't. There's a reason these principles should be encouraging us to actually do something different instead of just looking at it and saying, oh yeah, that's hard, or we're going to do it even though it doesn't make any sense. If this doesn't make any sense to do in the way that you're working, maybe you need to look at the way you're working. Maybe there's something you can change that would actually make this make more sense for you and increase your agility. Agile processes promote sustainable development. The sponsors, developers, and users should be able to maintain a constant pace indefinitely. The thing I think is so important about this is this gives clarity on how we can follow the other principles. So if you try to follow another principle in a way that is not sustainable, this says you're probably doing it wrong. And and this happens in all areas of life, but if you've ever been on a team that grabs onto one principle and does it in a way like, this feels wrong, this feels like we're hurting people, or we're doing things that are counterproductive here, it's probably because there's another principle that's meant to bring balance to that's being ignored. If we decide that we're going to, like the next one, continuous attention to technical excellence, and we're doing that by trying to get people to work 80 hours a week, well, then we're doing it wrong, right? If we're working together in a way that's not sustainable, then we're doing. If the only way we can get business involved is bring them into the team room and have them be with us for 8 hours, and then they have to go do another 8 hours of work to do what their regular job is, that's not going to be sustainable for everybody. So if there's ever something that feels wrong about a principle, I would go back and look at this one and make sure you're not violating this one in some way in another principle. And maybe there's a way that you can follow that other principle that doesn't violate this. Anyway, that's where I think this one is really valuable. Continuous attention to technical excellence and good design enhances agility. So here's a tweet I sent out here a while back. It says, Bob is a developer who says the code he writes is so good that it's a waste of time for him to create or maintain tests. This is a visual diagram of Bob adding a new feature to the application. So there's Bob adding a new feature to the application, but he's so good, he doesn't need to waste any time doing those tests or anything like that. So we're thinking about continuous attention to technical excellence and good design enhancing agility. One of the biggest ways to do that is through TDD and BDD. The teams I've seen that have really invested in this, though it usually in many cases, I've seen like they feel like they're going slower the first 2 to 4 weeks from starting a project from scratch. 2 to 4 weeks, they feel like they're going slower. And then from 4 to 8 weeks, they feel like, okay, this isn't so bad. It's no worse. It's no slower than doing it without it. And then once they get to 8 weeks, they're like, you're going to pry these BDD and TDD tests away out of my cold dead fingers because there's no way I'm ever working any other way other than this. But that's an investment that they're making in continuous attention to technical excellence and good design, because this is what lets you actually change your application and change your design. Let's see where we at. Okay, I'm going to move on. There's lots more we could talk about with this, but I'm going to move on to the next one. Simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done, is essential. Now, this one's easy to look at and think, oh, yes, maximizing the amount of work not done. I really like doing that. And my kids are really good at doing this, right? They're very good at maximizing the amount of work not done. That's not necessarily the same thing as simplicity is just not doing anything. And the story I like to tell related to this is I was working with a team on-site, hands-on coaching with them, and we were getting ready to start a new project, and they had an architecture they were going to use. It was very, from a software engineering standpoint, it looked very, very beautiful as they explained it to me. Like, okay, that's really cool. I see how this works. This is very, very well thought out, well designed stuff. And they had been working on understanding this architecture for like 4 or 5 weeks when I came in. So for about 2 weeks, I was nodding my head, and there were aspects of it that sounded really, really good. But then I finally realized while there were aspects that were really, really good, there was still a lot of complexity in it as well. Enough complexity that I wasn't sure how I would build something conforming with this architecture. And so in almost an emperor has no clothes moment, the child, and no one wants to say that the emperor doesn't have any clothes because they don't want to appear foolish. So I'm the smart consultant that came in, and I finally said, as we were talking through it, and I'm looking at this big chart we had all over the wall of how we're going to build stuff, and I said, I honestly don't understand this. I'm not sure if I needed to build this feature right here we're talking about. I'm not sure where I would put the different parts in this. And maybe it's just because I don't understand it well enough. But I'm willing to admit that I don't know how we would do it with this. And I'm usually pretty good at understanding things, but this particular thing, I'm stumped, and I've been looking at for 2 weeks. So I don't understand this. So I'm going to need more idea of how to do this. I need somebody to help train me how to do this because I'm not getting it. Once I said that, every other person in the room we'd all been nodding our heads, for me for 2 weeks, for them for 6 weeks, said, oh yeah, this is really, really complicated, and I don't know how I would do this either. After having that conversation, we then switched to a much simpler architecture, and were able to successfully deliver the project. But it was amazing how difficult that, and I will tell you, I was terrified to actually say, this does not look simple to me, because we have in our minds that, like, understanding complex things is what makes me valuable to people. But the fact that I did that probably had a lot to do with the project being successful, when we were able to all finally admit, this looks complicated, I don't understand this. And once one person was willing to admit it, everybody else was too. So that's an example of, we were able to dramatically reduce the amount of work that would have had to be done, because we were able to shift towards something that was simpler, and a simplicity that was more fit for the particular thing we were trying to deliver. The best architectures, requirements, and designs emerge from self-organizing teams. The story I like to tell about this is there was a factory. And so if we think about who has the knowledge to make the best decisions, is it somebody outside that doesn't know your company at all that's coming in and saying, here's the architecture you need to use? Or somebody that's outside the team saying, here's all the requirements and we're going to throw them over the wall to you? And this says that really self-organizing teams will produce better of these things, even if they are not maybe there's an architect, like a world-renowned architect that can come in and tell you, and what they say may be valuable, but this thing overall, if we're letting the team self-organize around how they solve these problems, we'll end up with better results. So the story I like to tell related to this is, there was a factory, and it put basically toothpaste tubes that were very, very valuable things in them, whatever this industry was. Valuable enough that they take the tubes, put them into boxes, and then ship the boxes out. Well, sometimes the way the factory worked is those boxes would be empty. And if somebody ordered stuff and got an empty box, it was valuable enough that they were going to call and make sure that they got that. And the CEO was realizing that they were spending a lot of time fulfilling these orders that should have had tubes in them, but for some reason they weren't. So they brought in a high-paid consultant, and he was like, okay, if we put a laser here and it shines on the side of the cardboard box, on the other side we put a sensor, and it will be able to see enough that if it can see the light on the other side, then that means the tube isn't in it, and then we'll set off this alarm and stop the factory, or this particular part of the factory, and somebody can come take it off so we don't mess it up, so we don't ship any of these out. CEO was delighted. They spent hundreds of $1,000s on this, and the CEO had a report of how many times empty boxes got sent out through. And after they had run it for a while and shipped it, there were no empty boxes. No one called in to say that they had gotten an empty box. But then he's also looking on his little report here, and he saw that while this thing had gone off a few times, there were no metrics showing that it had done anything in the last 3 or 4 weeks. And so he's like, well, that's odd, because we're getting the results we want, but it doesn't look like this thing is actually triggering anymore. So he went down to the factory floor to look at it. And when he got there, he discovered that the device that this consultant had built and stuff had been disconnected. It was turned off, kind of pushed off to the side. There were cardboard boxes that these tubes would go in, scattered all over the floor. Not a whole bunch, but they were scattered all over the place. And then there was a big fan sitting right there. And so he went to find the floor manager and said, hey, what's going on? Why is this thing disconnected? And what's all these boxes on the floor? And the manager was like, oh, I'm sorry, we'll get those picked up. And the CEO's like, no, I'm not worried about that. But why is this thing disconnected? And you've got a fan in its place and these boxes everywhere. And the floor manager said, oh, Bob works the night shift, and he was in here, and that thing kept going off, that we put the thing in, made that loud noise and shut everything down, and it would always take him away from something else he was doing, and he felt like it wasn't very efficient. So he went back to his desk, and he had a big fan in there for when it's really hot during the summer, and he came and he set it next to the factory line, and if the box doesn't have anything in it, it blows the box out of the way, but if not, if there's tubes in it, it goes on. And then we just disconnect that other stuff, because it was just slowing us down with stuff. And the thing I like about that story is the fact that there was somebody there that actually worked really close to the problem, that knew a way to fix it, that was far less expensive, much more effective, and did exactly what they needed. And the concept of this story of there being a way of self-organizing to deliver something better than having somebody come in from the outside that doesn't have the context of the team. Anyway, story I like related to self-organization. At regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective and tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly. Most of us will experience this as the retrospective. But I think it's important to recognize that Agile is about improving, not being at a particular state. If you ever see a team that says, oh, we transformed and now we're Agile, that's probably a pretty good indication that they're probably not actually delivering with a lot of agility. Or if they are today, they won't be tomorrow, because this is a big important part, is being able to continue to adapt, and that being the mindset of it's a way of continuing to improve, not a way of saying, okay, we're at this particular state, let's eat a cake and say we're done and move on to the next thing. I'm going to skip over this because we're running a little bit short on time. Agile is a set of values and principles. It becomes a shared foundation for making decisions. So how do you recognize a mature Agile team? Well, they should solve problems by reasoning about the principles. The teams I've seen that are effective are the ones that are in the daily stand-up. They're like, somebody comes up with an idea and they'll say, oh, if we want to do that idea, we need to do it in this way because that would follow our principles. Or that idea sounds like it kind of conflicts with this principle. Is there a way we can tune it in a way that doesn't conflict with these other principles? So for example, what technology should we use for our daily stand-up? Well, if somebody suggests if somebody asks that, we should say, do we have any principles about the way we communicate? If somebody suggests smoke signals, you should probably say, that doesn't sound like it's going to be prioritizing face-to-face communication. If somebody suggests we're going to do our daily stand-up, our daily face-to-face meeting, but we're just going to do it in a Slack channel and type stuff back and forth, is there some aspect that we will be missing of face-to-face communication if we take that approach? If we have questions about how should we report our progress, well, do we have any principles about how we measure progress? If it's working software, that should influence how we answer this question. How should we get our requirements? Well, if somebody asks that and somebody says, oh, I've got an idea, let's write everything down and then give it to the developers. Well, we should ask ourselves, what does that do with our collaboration versus contract negotiation? It's not that we not want to necessarily write things down, but that sounds like we're more doing things as a contract for the developers rather than actually working with them. Also, what does that have to do with the business working together every day with the developers? Would this violate our principle that developers and customers should be working together every day? So the point I want to make is your decisions matter. And you can't borrow decisions from someone else. So if a team looks at another team and says, oh, they're doing really well, here's how they are following the Agile principles. We're going to skip the principles and just follow them and do the same thing they're doing. That usually doesn't produce good results, because the way that they're doing things should be adapting as they go, but should be for their particular situation, in their particular circumstances, as the way to follow the principles. And I think that's very important for teams to realize, that they should be following the principles in the way that works best for them, not just in the way that another team did it, or somebody that they heard on YouTube or saw speak at a conference. It's a matter of adapting to your particular circumstances. And that's what the principle gives you, is a way to have those conversations with your team about how to make continuous improvement. Okay, I'm going to skip on through, just going to make sure we have time to give away a shirt here. So I want to mention one thing about cargo cult. During World War II, natives on Pacific Islands watched and participated in clearing areas for runways, and planes would land full of supplies and other goods that directly and indirectly benefited the islanders. After the war, the planes stopped coming and the flow of goods dried up. So after that happened, cults developed, and there's still some to this day, but cults developed around trying to mimic the actions they had seen that would bring the planes down from the sky with all the good stuff. And there's recorded situations where people built a bamboo, like a control tower, put somebody in. They had two coconut halves over their ears. There are people out waving like they had seen with the planes coming down. Anyway, they were doing all these things, mimicking the actions that they had seen, without the things that actually were making what they were trying to accomplish. So in some cases, they built these planes out of bamboo, hoping it would attract other planes. And my goal in saying this is not to say, oh, look at the people, they were doing something funny there because they didn't know any better. But no, this is exactly what teams do with Agile when they get into a case where they see other teams that are doing something that's working successfully for them. And then without understanding how they got there, they start just mimicking the stuff that they saw them doing without understanding why that particular thing worked in that particular situation. And this is what the Agile principles let us do, is to back up and say, okay, how do I make the decisions to get to the point where we can be successful like those teams by doing the things that this particular team needs to do to be successful? This is a radiometer, and I've got a few in my office. I should have brought one over. And when you put it in the sunlight, it spins. You may have seen it back when they used to sell incandescent bulbs at Home Depot and stuff like that. They would use these to show how much better the LED lights were, because there wasn't as much radiation, so it wouldn't spin as fast. Anyway, I first ran into these at my great-grandpa's house in Abilene, Kansas. I remember being amazed by it and looking at it, and my mom explained to me that it's a vacuum in it, so when the light beams hit those little vanes, it makes it spin because there's no resistance. There's no air resistance in it. When I became an adult and I had a little bit of discretionary money to spend, I was like, I want to get one of these. So I finally found some, bought it, and I was like, okay, how do they work? And I discovered that my mom had been mostly correct, and actually was correct based on what science said at that day. But it turned out it wasn't entirely accurate, because later on they made radiometers where they actually sucked all the air out of it and there was no air in it. And what they discovered is, if there was no air whatsoever, the thing that we were saying causes the friction, if there was none of that, it wouldn't turn at all. And so what I think is interesting is, with the radiometer, the thing that we see as causing the friction was actually the thing that made it work. And I want to encourage you, as you're working with your teams, to kind of think about that, because on teams that are getting a lot of agility, it's not that there's not friction. It's that they've created an environment, and this is what the Agile principles do, but create an environment where that friction actually helps work get done instead of impeding it. And so I actually have one of these I usually keep on my desk to remind me when I'm working with teams and there's a little bit of conflict going on. It's asking myself, okay, how do we create an environment where this conflict is actually productive and is helping us move forward, rather than it being something that's impeding us? So think about, what does Agile mean for your team? And I was going to talk a little bit here about AI and the future of software engineering. I'm going to throw that into a different talk, because I want to do a giveaway here. Once again, Agile LnL, you can go there if people are interested in any of those invitations coming up. Also, the archives show up there. And now, for what you've been waiting for, we are giving away one of the sweatshirts that says, "We value face-to-face communication." I think I have everything over there except for medium. So if you're medium, large will probably work as well. So go ahead and join. We've got 5 questions over the stuff we talked about, covering everything from the role of BDD and TDD and technical excellence and all those things. So go ahead and join, and we will give away a sweatshirt. I'll give a few more seconds. It's a lot more fun to participate, so I'd encourage you to go ahead and join. We've got, I think, quite a few people in here that have not joined yet. So let me give you just a few more seconds while I get things ready here. Okay, there's about 50 of you that haven't joined. And if you don't join, you can't win. So I would encourage you to go ahead and click on that, go to the Slido. You can, if you're in some place that you can't get to Slido, just bring up your phone. We'll give it just a few more seconds here. Okay, and you can join late too, which chances of winning are higher if you join. Okay, so 5 seconds left. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's go. First question. What do the Agile principles say should be our primary measure of progress? Is it story points, features, working software, iterations, or happy customers? Story points, features, working software, iterations, or happy customers? Yes, working software. Happy customers is very closely related to working software, but the particular principle we're looking at is the working software. In a lot of places, though, I find that we end up valuing our story points more than the actual working software for various reasons. But that's something to look at and think about. From the team's perspective, do they feel like they're delivering story points, or do they feel like they're delivering working software that hopefully makes happy customers? And you can be in a situation where you say you're delivering working software and you say that's your measure of progress, but really the thing everybody's measuring is story points. And sometimes in those situations, I suggest getting away from story points if you can, and just delivering stories. And we'll try to get all the stories down to a small enough size that they're somewhat related to each other. And in some cases, that shift in focus can be very, very valuable. Okay, leaderboard. We've got, I think it's Marnie, I think I'm saying it right, in the top spot. Moving on. What did Mark suggest is one of the most important components of technical excellence? Is it architectural planning, following standards, TDD and BDD, safe, or small teams? What did Mark suggest is one of the most important components of technical excellence? Yes, TDD and BDD. Now, these are good things, right? I think small teams are very, very, very vital for agility, but TDD and BDD is the thing I called out in that particular case. Okay, Marnie's still in the top spot, followed by Shruti, Debbie, Natalia, and Michael W. What question will help drive simplicity? And I may not have talked about this one, but do your best guess. Have we sufficiently planned out this story? Have we put everything into the story that we might need? Are we using the most up-to-date technology? Or is there anything we can leave out of this story and still deliver value? So yes, it's this last one that I was thinking of. If we ask ourselves, have we put everything into the story that we might possibly need, we will probably make things more and more complex. If we start asking ourselves, is there anything we can leave out of this story and still deliver something, the next most valuable thing, we may find that we're able to leave some things out that aren't as important as something else we could be working on. So this is one of the big ways of driving simplicity. The other thing about asking this question is I find in a lot of cases it actually helps you get into a situation where you do things in a way that are more simple. Like one thing I've seen a lot is instead of building a lot of sorting functionality in the application, you make it where they can download data into Excel and then sort it there. And so it's a simpler way to do things that you would have to write a lot of code to do otherwise. Okay, we've got Marnie, Debbie, Eliza, Natalie, Dayla. How do you recognize a mature, agile team? They always come to consensus. They never miss a sprint commitment. They work from home. They work in the office. They use agile principles as the foundation of their decisions. 2 seconds. And yes, they use agile principles as the foundation of their decision. I think the last question. When should Agile teams welcome change? When it makes the customer happy, when it can be harnessed for the customer's competitive advantage, when management asks for a change, when milestones are missed, or when people don't know how to do something. I'm sorry, we went a little bit over. I'm out of practice, evidently. Yes, so it can be harnessed for the customer's competitive advantage. And very good, Marnie, you win the sweatshirt. So like I said, I think we've got small, large, extra large, double X, and maybe triple X over there. So send me your address, Marnie. You can take a snapshot of this. Send me your address just if you reply to the invite, or here, I'll throw my... there's my email address in there. But go ahead and send me a screenshot of this or just your name, and we'll get you that and your address and the size that you would want. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Remember, next week we're going to be talking about, we've got TAs coming from a very successful computer science program, talking just about how we approach teaching, solving problems in code. I think it's going to be very, very interesting for lots of different aspects of if you work in different areas of technology. So thank you all for coming. Please don't hesitate to reach out if your team ever needs help with anything, and hope to see you next week.